My name is Vera Caldwell. I'm 36 years old, and I work as an accountant in Pennsylvania. Numbers have always been my safe place, steady, logical, predictable. But life, unlike numbers, rarely adds up the way you expect. That truth hit me hardest the evening I buried my husband. I drove home from the funeral in silence, my black dress clinging to me, the smell of damp earth still on my hands from touching the coffin. All I wanted was to walk into my living room, set down my grief, and breathe. Instead, I opened the door to find my parents and my younger sister already inside. Their luggage was neatly unpacked. My mother's coat hung on my rack. My father's shoes sat in the entryway, as if they owned the place. My sister leaned casually against the couch that Daniel and I had picked together, her arms folded and her eyes glittering. She smirked. "This house is ours now. I've already sold your belongings, so get out." The words should have knocked me to the floor. After all, this wasn't just a house. It was the home Daniel and I built with our bare hands and stubborn hope. But in that moment, I didn't scream, didn't cry. Instead, I smiled. A small, quiet smile that seemed to unsettle them more than anger ever could. Because the truth was, this house wasn't theirs to take. And something far more shocking was waiting just around the corner. My father muted the television with a flick of the remote like he was silencing me. "We handled things while you were at the cemetery. Someone had to. We'll list the property this week. Your sister already found a buyer." I looked at the suitcase half zipped on the floor. Tucked between layers of clothes, I spotted one of my photo albums, the corners bent as though it had been shoved in carelessly. A picture of Daniel's smile peeked out. My stomach tightened, but I didn't reach for it. Instead, I stepped farther into the room, setting my funeral clutch on the table. The surface was bare except for a few stray crumbs. My mother had already claimed the good china for herself, apparently over tea. The lipstick mark on the cup was hers, brazen and red. "While you were busy crying," my sister continued, "we decided it was time you stopped clinging to things you can't handle. You'll thank us later." I let her words hang in the air. My Aunt Lillian's door at the end of the hall was closed, the faint sound of her wheelchair moving behind it. They had even pushed their suitcases into her room, the one Daniel and I designed with ramps and handrails so she could live with dignity. My mother followed my eyes and shrugged. "She'll be fine. We'll arrange something for her later. This space is more practical for us." The rage that tried to rise in me was sharp, almost blinding. But Daniel's voice echoed in my memory, steady as ever. "Don't waste yourself shouting. Keep your center. Truth is louder than noise." So, I breathed. I walked past them, past the suitcases and the smell of cheap perfume that now coated my walls, and into the kitchen. The counters were littered with wrappers from takeout. My sister laughed behind me. "Oh, don't get too attached to the place. It's basically sold." I poured myself a glass of water, steadying my hands on the sink. The glass trembled slightly, but I lifted it anyway and took a sip. Then I turned back to face them. "You're certain this house is yours?" I asked softly. My father leaned back, smug. "Of course. Family is family. You've been living on borrowed time." I nodded slowly, then set the glass down with care. "Interesting," I said, my voice calm. "Because this house was never yours to claim." Their faces twitched, confusion first, then irritation. My sister barked a laugh. "Stop bluffing. You're alone now. You don't even have Daniel to hide behind." I smiled again, not wide, not gloating, just the kind of smile that comes from knowing something no one else in the room does. "I don't need to hide," I said. "And as for being alone, you'll see soon enough that I'm not." The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the ticking of the old wall clock, Daniel's favorite thrift store find. Tick, 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 each second daring them to call my bluff. I didn't move toward the hallway closet where the locked drawer waited. I didn't reach for the file cabinet in the study. Not yet. That would come later, when the time was right. For now, all I offered them was stillness, a smile, and the promise that the story wasn't over. And as I stood in that living room, my living room, surrounded by the very people who were supposed to protect me, I thought, if you've ever walked into your own home and found it stolen by those you trusted most, stay with me. Watch what happens when truth steps quietly into the room. Because they believed they'd already won. They believed grief had made me powerless. But they had no idea what was coming. Before tonight's standoff in my living room, there was a quieter story that led me here. I'm firstborn, the daughter who learned to make room for everyone else. At home, my parents praised my younger sister for being delicate and promising. I was reliable, practical, the one who picked up shifts, fixed the printer, remembered insurance due dates. Affection came to me as requests. Could you cover the bill, Vera? And approval sounded like silence. College gave me a temporary exit. I shelved books and tasted the relief that comes from money equaling choices. Then my dad's truck died, my mom needed a crown, my sister wanted deposits for a program she might drop by spring. The calls lined up like invoices. I told myself duty was love. Every transfer felt like keeping the roof from leaking, even while I was the one standing in the rain. I met Daniel at a charity 5K my office sponsored. He hated running, grinning while pretending the finish line was a mirage. He'd sue for false advertising. I laughed. When I said I was an accountant, expecting the usual nod, he answered, "So you translate chaos into clarity." No one had framed it that way. It felt like sunlight through a dusty window. Coffee became a walk. He noticed small things. How I read menus price first. How I saved the crust for last if the bread was good. How I flinched when unknown numbers rang. "You don't have to answer tonight," he said. "Let the world leave a message." Permission felt like oxygen. We married without spectacle. Courthouse vows, backyard barbecue, sparklers at dusk, because he said every ordinary life deserves fireworks. Once. We rented a modest apartment where the balcony faced a maple, and the neighbors' wind chimes rang off-key but cheerfully. We planned nothing dramatic, only steady days. He cooked Saturday breakfast, I color-coded the calendar. When the checkbook balanced, he kissed the top of my head like I'd composed a symphony. Then Aunt Lillian's car was hit at a stoplight. Spinal damage meant a chair, therapy, and 1,000 new logistics. Lillian had been the first adult to take my side without requiring proof. When my parents dismissed my scholarships as tiny, she drove me to campus anyway, rolled down the windows and said, "Hear that? That's your life starting." After the accident, she apologized to me for needing help. I told her I'd waited years to repay a kindness. Daniel didn't hesitate. "We'll make a home that fits her," he said, like announcing a recipe. He sketched on a receipt. Wider doorways, lower counters, a ramp curved like a smile. We toured listings I could afford on paper and he could transform in practice. The first time Lillian visited a place with a smooth threshold, she cried, not theatrically, but with stunned relief as her wheels crossed without a bump. I cried too, holding a door that finally didn't fight us. We moved into a small fixer with sunlight pooling on the kitchen tile. Daniel installed grab bars and learned which screws were patient and which snapped if rushed. I painted while podcasts hummed. The ramp took 3 weekends and 1 splinter. When we finished, Lillian rolled from hallway to living room and said, "It feels like the floor is listening." She nodded like a queen. My parents visited once and called the ramp an eyesore. My sister asked to stage birthday photos here for the aesthetic. I smiled and said no. She pouted, then asked for rent money because her roommate wouldn't understand art. Daniel squeezed my hand beneath the table, sensing the old choreography of me reaching for my wallet. That night he told me, "You aren't a rescue fund. You're a person." The sentence landed like a key turning. From then on, we built rituals that felt like ballast. Sunday pancakes, Tuesday lists, Thursday loops around the block with Lillian setting the pace. We promised to keep making room, but at last, also for ourselves, the house became a compass. Every screw and brushstroke repeated the same instruction. Make it safe for her, and in doing so, make it safe for me. That promise became our quiet daily vow. We started house hunting with a spreadsheet and a promise. I would take the loan in my name because Daniel's credit record was thin after a gap between jobs. The mortgage officer studied my pay stubs and said I qualified on my salary. In the parking lot, Daniel squeezed my hand and told me the name on a deed never measured love. We would build the rest together. We toured places that smelled like lemon cleaner and old carpet. Every showing turned into a checklist for Aunt Lillian. Could a chair clear the threshold? Could she pivot in the hallway without bruising her knuckles? Where would the light fall at noon so she could read without glare? I carried hope and a pen that wrote on blue painter's tape. We found our house on a Wednesday. It was a small cape with a tired roof, a maple in front, and a backyard full of clover. I saw a ramp rising from the driveway like a gentle wave that would not throw anyone off balance. The realtor talked about comps and trends. We nodded and counted outlets. That night, we made an offer and waited with the quiet patience that comes when a door feels almost open. On closing day, we carried 2 folding chairs into the empty living room and 8 sandwiches on the floor. I thanked Daniel for never letting pride fight paperwork. He said the name on the page did not change who built the living inside. We walked from door to door and measured the turning radius for a chair. I marked studs with tape. The ramp came first. Daniel watched tutorials and called a contractor friend for tips. We snapped chalk lines and rented a saw. The first cut bit rough, so he adjusted the blade and tried again. Lillian visited and traced the air with her hand to feel the slope. She asked if the rise would feel safe. Daniel said we would test it together before bolts went in. Inside, the counters needed a kinder height. We removed base cabinets and set them on blocks to test reach. Lillian rolled to the sink and smiled at the faucet like it had been waiting for her. I wrote down every inch she named as comfortable. Daniel lowered one section so she could chop herbs without strain. He installed a pull-out shelf for the mixer and moved one outlet higher so cords would not trail across her lap. Handrails became a language. One in the hallway, one near the bathroom sink. A pair by the front step, in case someone preferred to walk. Daniel learned which anchors held in plaster and which needed toggles. He spoke to the house as if it were learning with us. Lillian tried every rail and told us where her shoulder relaxed. The first evening we rolled Lillian from the ramp into the living room, the sunset caught her face. She touched the coffee table and said quietly that this was the first time she did not feel like a burden. The sentence settled over us. I felt a weight lift from my ribs. Daniel stood behind her chair and nodded. We ate soup from chipped bowls and clinked spoons like a toast to a house that had learned how to welcome her. News of the purchase reached my parents and my sister within days. They arrived with a box of pastries and a bag of opinions. My mother called the ramp an eyesore. My father asked why we had shaved good cabinets to suit a chair. My sister filmed a loop on her phone and joked that our tiny house was pretending to be a mansion. She asked to host her birthday here for the backdrop. I said no. She pouted and asked for rent money on the porch. I stayed quiet and memorized every word and every glance. That night, Daniel flattened the pastry box for recycling and asked if I was all right. I told him I was, and that I had taken a photograph in my mind. Every slight was a nail I would not forget. I pressed my palm to the new rail at the front step and promised the house would remember who it was built to hold. The ramp rested in the dark like a quiet oath. Inside the counters waited at their gentler height. The walls held the scent of cut pine and new paint. Hope lived there with us and stayed. Mornings became our proof that an ordinary life could be beautiful. I woke to the click of the grinder and the soft whisper of beans. Daniel measured water. He set 2 cups on the counter and warmed them with a rinse so the coffee would not shock the ceramic. I balanced the budget on a yellow pad while coffee bloomed in the press. Aunt Lillian read on the porch with a blanket on her knees and the maple scattering coins of light across her page. The morning light steadied my tired heart. Daniel built breakfast like a quiet poem. He plated toast and fruit, then topped my mug with a careful pour that never spilled. I kept our ledger honest. He kept the rooms kind. When I checked due dates, he checked hinges. When Lillian winced at a threshold, he sanded it smooth. We learned the weather by sound. The ramp creaked when frost set before dawn. Rain ticked on the vent above the stove. Wind shook the maple and made the neighbors' chimes wobble. Lillian called it the daily orchestra. Daniel said he preferred rhythm to traffic. On Tuesdays, I corrected payroll and printed confirmations. On Sundays, we folded laundry while a game hummed from a small radio. On Fridays, he oiled the handrails until they felt like river stones, then wiped the counters until the pine smell rose sweet and clean. Sometimes Daniel paused with his palm on the kitchen door and watched me total a column. He liked how I mouthed the numbers as if they were choreography. I laughed, then I saw the seriousness in his face. He wanted me to hear something larger. He would say it softly. If anything ever happens, you will still stand. I have prepared. I thought he meant savings and a neat file drawer. I told him we were too young to talk like that. He nodded and changed the subject, but the sentence stayed, bright as a pin. Lillian began writing again. She drafted little essays about storefronts and kindness, and the way strangers hold doors without fanfare. She read them while Daniel tested a new height for the cutting board. I corrected commas and told her every line landed. She said ease is not laziness, it is the absence of needless struggle. She said the house felt like a promise kept. The phone rang one Thursday with my father's name. I almost let it pass to voicemail. My sister had texted that she needed help with a deposit that could not wait. Urgent was her favorite word. Emergency meant I was expected to pay. I answered and kept my voice steady. My father asked for money to fix a problem that kept changing shape. I asked for details. He offered none. He said a daughter should not interrogate her family. I said I could not transfer funds. The silence that followed felt like a vote taken in a room where I had never been allowed to sit. My mother took the phone. Her tone was the one I knew from childhood. She said, "Did you forget who raised you?" I said I had not forgotten. I also had not forgotten rent and groceries and co-pays and the long years when my labor was the thank you card no one signed. She called me ungrateful. I looked at the ramp and said I was careful, not ungrateful. She hung up without a goodbye. I stood with the handset in my palm and let my breathing catch up to my spine. Daniel slid a glass of water toward me and waited. I told him I had said no. Lillian rolled forward and squeezed my wrist. The three of us carried the quiet for a minute. The kettle clicked as it cooled. Peace returned like a bird that trusts the sill again. I wrote the date at the top of a fresh page and turned to the next line of our ordinary life. Mornings had a map, and then one morning refused to follow it. I woke to the grinder and the soft rasp of Daniel's slippers on the floor. He brought the French press to the counter and reached for mugs. I still remember the smell of coffee on his hands, then the sound of the cup shattering on the tile. He made a small, surprised sound and folded at the waist as if someone had pulled a cord. His eyes asked a question I could not answer. I caught his shoulder and called his name. I dialed for help and pressed my palm to his sternum the way the training video taught me. The dispatcher counted with me in a voice that never shook. Sirens stitched the street outside. EMTs filled the kitchen with zippers and clipped words. They lifted him gently and asked me to ride up front. I buckled the belt and watched the ramp flash past the window. The emergency room was all light and noise. A nurse placed forms under my hand, while another tucked a blanket around my aunt in the waiting area. A doctor with kind eyes sat with me in a narrow family room. He spoke slowly and asked about Daniel's history. He said congenital heart disease can hide until the wrong morning. He said they had done everything. He said the phrase, "no one is," ready to hear. I heard the clock on the wall and the pull of my breath, and then nothing at all. I held Daniel's hand and told him what the house smelled like after rain. I told him Lillian had slept late and that the maple was already dropping seeds on the walk. I kissed his knuckles and thanked him for every hinge he sanded smooth. A nurse touched my shoulder and I realized I was shaking only on the inside. The funeral felt smaller than the love it tried to hold. Wind moved over the cemetery like a careful hand. I stood at the edge of the open ground and let the pastor's words pass through me. My parents arrived in dark coats. My sister dabbed at her eyes. They sat for the first hymn and slipped away before the last prayer. I heard them ask the director about fees near the cars. I did not follow. I did not call out. Lillian reached for me, and I steadied her chair while the earth settled into its own heavy sentence. That night the house was too quiet. Steam curled from the kettle and vanished. I set Daniel's mug upright and wiped away the ring it had left on the counter. I folded the blanket he kept on the back of the couch. I opened a window and let the cool air come in. I went to the desk and wrote his name once. Then I wrote mine. I told myself I would stand. He had trusted that I could. I promised I would learn what he prepared. I drove home from the burial on streets that looked familiar and felt wrong. I parked by the maple and sat one breath longer than I needed. The house waited with its same patient face. When I unlocked the door, I understood what had changed. My parents were inside, my sister was inside. Their suitcases were open, and their clothes were already in my drawers. The couch Daniel and I chose was gone. A line of dust traced where the coffee table should have been. My mother stood in my kitchen and stirred honey into a cup from our set. My father watched the window with his hands in his pockets like a landlord judging a tenant. My sister balanced on the arm of a chair and smiled as if she had solved a puzzle. She spoke first. "You cannot hold this house. It is ours now." She tipped her chin toward the hall. "I went through your closets. Most of your things are sold or reserved. Be smart. Move out, and we will decide what you can keep." I closed the door and set my keys in the bowl where Daniel always landed his. The room smelled of cologne and cardboard. I felt my heart beat slow until it matched the tick of the kitchen clock. I walked to the space where our coffee table had stood and placed my hand on the ghost outline. My father cleared his throat. "Your mother and I will manage the sale. You owe the family, Vera. It is time to pay." My mother nodded without meeting my eyes. "We raised you. You lived here by our grace. Your sister has better plans for this place. Do not make it hard." I looked at their luggage. I looked at the wet ring they left on the sideboard. Behind Aunt Lillian's door, I heard the soft shift of her chair. She had stayed still to let me go first. We had always done it that way. My sister wandered down the hall and came back with one of my sweaters. She held it to the light like she might post it from the doorway. "If you leave by tomorrow, we will be generous. The market is hot. We need action." I turned off the low flame under the kettle. The water had boiled down to a bitter smell. I poured it into the sink and rinsed the cup my mother had used. I set it upside down to dry. I returned to the living room and stood where they could see my hands. "You came while I was saying goodbye," I said. "You unpacked your bags and sold my things." I kept my voice level. My father lifted one shoulder. "We acted like adults. You are emotional. You would not make sound choices. We stepped in." My mother pushed a suitcase closed with her foot. "Family takes care of family. You remind us of that when you send money. This is the same idea on a larger scale." My sister rolled her eyes. "Stop dragging it out. It is simple. You do not get to keep the house. We do." I let my mouth find a smile. It was not wide. It was the curve a person wears when she knows the ground is firmer than it looks. I did not argue. I did not show a page. I did not open a drawer. They mistook the quiet for surrender. My father said he had contacted an agent. My mother announced a paint color for the front room. My sister bragged that her friends had claimed pieces. I tapped on Aunt Lillian's door. She answered with a calm, "Yes." I opened it and saw her hands folded on her blanket. Her eyes asked me a question. I nodded to tell her I was steady. She touched the rail we had installed and gave me a brave, small smile. I stepped back into the living room and looked around like a buyer who knows she has time. I saw the pale square where a frame had hung. I saw the patch where Daniel had missed a stud on his first try. I saw the ramp through the glass like a quiet sentence. My sister raised the sweater like a flag. "Clock is ticking," she said. "Packer, watch us pack for you." "Noted," I said. I picked up my keys and set them back down. I folded the corner of a moving blanket they had dragged from the closet. I lifted a photo that had slipped from the stack and placed it on the mantel. I did little things that told the house it still knew my hands. "You are wasting time," my father said. "Sometimes time tells the truth," I said. "You only have to give it a minute." That was all I gave them. No lecture, no scene, only a promise inside a quiet room. It would grow while they slept. It would arrive without shouting. I kept breathing. It would begin with a smile and end with a door they could not open. Night pooled in the corners of Aunt Lillian's room. The living room hummed with my parents' voices on the other side of the door, low and satisfied, like a radio I could not switch off. I pulled the chain on, the lamp. A small circle of light settled on the quilt. Lillian watched the doorway as if it might bite. Her hands trembled when she reached for mine. "Honey, how could they do this after you just lost your husband?" I squeezed her fingers. "Because they think grief makes me blind. They think I will fold if they push hard enough." She searched my face. "Are you all right?" "No," I said. "But I am steady. The steadiness is new. I can feel it under everything." We listened to the house breathe. The ramp ticked as the night cooled. Someone laughed in the kitchen. I pictured my mother setting out her favorite mug on my counter, as if claiming a throne. "I keep remembering his voice," Lillian whispered. "He told me this place would always be safe for us." I nodded. "He told me that too." I helped her settle deeper into the pillows. I took off her shoes and lined them beside the chair, right toe touching left. Order was the only tenderness I could offer while the world misbehaved. "You need to sleep," I said. "So do you," she answered. "But your eyes are awake." The hallway was dark when I stepped out. The house felt larger without our furniture, like a stage after someone has struck the set. I moved quietly past the kitchen where the empty space of the table left a hard echo. In the study, the file cabinet waited. The key hung on a ribbon inside the closet, tucked in the pocket of my winter coat. My fingers found it as if they had practiced in a dream. I turned the lock and opened the bottom drawer. I slid out the envelope Daniel had labeled in his careful block letters. Living Trust. Another envelope rested behind it. Insurance. He had shown me these once, months ago, at this same desk. He said planning was not pessimism. It was love in a sturdy coat. I had nodded without really hearing. Tonight the words unfolded with weight. I carried the envelopes back to Lillian's room and set them on the nightstand where she could see them without fear. She lifted her head. "What is that?" "Proof," I said. "Quiet proof." "Will it keep them from taking the house?" "It will make the house tell the truth," I answered. "That is enough." We spoke softly about tomorrow. I would call our attorney in the morning. I would send copies and wait for official words to appear where they could not be ignored. Lillian closed her eyes and opened them again. "You should not have to do this tonight," she said. "Tonight is when I remember how to stand," I said. "They can fill rooms, but they cannot fill the space inside my chest where he left instructions." She smiled, faint and real. "You always were braver than you believed." I turned off the lamp. The dark returned gently. I sat in the chair beside her and felt the envelopes under my palm, cool and patient. On the far side of the house, the front door rattled as the wind shifted. I let the noise pass through. I did not flinch. Outside, the maple lifted its branches and laid them back down, a tide against the siding, and the house breathed with me until patience settled my chest. I sat with the envelopes under my palm and felt an older room rise around me. I closed my eyes and the memory opened like a drawer. The desk was the same. The afternoon was different. Daniel took a half day from work. Our friend Mark Rivera came with a briefcase. He cleared a space and said we would go slowly. Daniel began. He looked at me and then at Mark. He said we needed a plan that did not rely on anyone's mood. Mark asked what worried us. I told him the truth. My parents ask for money the way other people ask for salt. My sister treats promises like coupons. I said I was tired of being a wallet with a name. Mark drew a house and wrote my name above it. He circled both and wrote Revocable Living Trust. He underlined trustee and pointed at me. He said the house could be moved into the trust by deed. He said a trust is a container that keeps shape even when storms roll through. He said it would simply make the rules clear. I asked why we needed a trust when the deed already had my name. Daniel touched my wrist. He said a name is one line, but a trust is a whole page. He said the trust would let me act without waiting for approvals if life turned crooked. He said it would place our intent in writing where no cousin or neighbor could bend it out of shape. Mark turned a sheet. He wrote pour over will and beneficiary designations. He said one document feeds the other, so there are no gaps where confusion can grow. He said the trust could also name Aunt Lillian as someone whose right to live here is protected. She smiled from the doorway and said she would pay us in stories. Mark said, stories count. Then he opened the briefcase and took out a thin folder. He said we should add one more layer. He asked about the mortgage. Daniel said the loan was modest. Mark suggested life insurance with a rider that clears the balance if the insured dies. He said the process is simple. Pay the premium and keep the policy in the file. If the worst happens, the house stays whole and the bank steps away. I stared at the list and felt the old fear that planning invites loss. Daniel refilled my water. He said planning is seatbelts and spare keys. He said he wanted me safe even in a world that refused to be. I told him I hated the picture he drew and loved the part where I survived it. We signed drafts once and final pages later. Mark slid the deed across the wood and showed me where to initial. He filed the trust and recorded the deed. He emailed confirmation and a list of where to store copies. One set stayed in the cabinet, another lived in a safe. He labeled folders in block letters. A month later, we met again to check the beneficiaries. Daniel put his hand over mine while Mark read the names. He said the trust would stand if one of us fell. He said the policy would pay the lender and leave me room to breathe. He said I would not be forced to sell the house to satisfy anyone else's. Urgency. The room held the sound of that promise like a bell. On the way home, Daniel bought me a milkshake. He said the bravest thing I had done was to allow myself to be protected. We walked the ramp at dusk, and he ran his hand along the rail as if blessing it. He said he would rather live forever and not leave anything to chance. Now I open my eyes in the dark, and the envelopes are under my palm again. The plan lives where he left it. The language is dry, and the care is bright. Tomorrow I will lift the lid on the file and let the documents breathe. Tonight I sit still and feel the future turn toward the truth we wrote when no one was watching. Morning arrived thin and gray. I washed my face, tucked the envelopes back into the drawer, and helped Aunt Lillian with her sweater. When she was settled with her book and tea, I walked toward the living room. My parents sat at the table they had not earned. My sister sprawled in the chair she planned to photograph for a listing. A notepad lay open with crooked numbers. She tapped her pen and announced, "At this price, it is at least $300,000. We split it fairly." My father nodded. "We should move quickly. The market is softening." My mother circled a paint color that did not suit the walls. "Buyers like light," she said, studying the room as if rearranging objects could rewrite ownership. I pulled out a chair and sat. I did not ask them to stop. I did not defend Daniel's hours or the rails we had installed. I folded my hands and listened. The quiet I brought into the room changed its temperature. My sister gave a little laugh. "Well, look who finally wants in. Vera, we will be generous if you cooperate. Think of it as a reset." I set my phone on the table with the screen facing up. The red dot glowed. I kept my voice even. "What are you planning to list? Walk me through it." "The house," my father said, "and the contents not already spoken for. We will use the agent your sister knows." My mother added, "Family should benefit together. Your name on papers was temporary. You know how we do things." My sister leaned forward. "Do you intend to make this difficult? We can call a locksmith and change what needs changing." I angled the phone so the microphone could hear. "I'm only here to hear you," I said. "And to record what you are saying." My father blinked. "What do you think you are doing?" "Just planning to listen and to keep a record," I answered. "Since decisions are being made, it helps to have an accurate account." The room shifted. My sister scoffed, but the lines around her mouth tightened. My mother's hands retreated from the brochure. For a breath, no one moved. My father tried to reclaim the center. You think a phone changes the fact that we raised you, we decide what happens to this property, you owe us respect. I let the sentence settle. Respect and ownership are not synonyms, I said. Keep going. He cleared his throat. We are within our rights. You will sign what is needed. You will vacate. Your aunt will go to a facility that can handle her chair. Lillian's door was closed, but I felt her attention like a candle behind wood. I kept my eyes on the table. State that clearly for the recording. My mother gave me a warning look. Do not twist our words. We are helping you. You are planning to remove me from my home, I said, and to move the woman we care for into an institution because it suits your timeline. That is what you are telling me. My sister smirked. Call it whatever you want. We call it finally getting what is fair. You have held the key long enough. I tapped the phone once to mark the moment. Noted. The balance tipped. Without a raised voice and without a sheet of paper, the center of the room turned. They heard themselves. They watched the red dot listening, and their confidence began to thin. My father pushed back his chair. Turn that off. I will when we are finished, I said. I want every detail right. Agent name, timeline. Your expectation that I sign away my claim. My mother whispered my name like a password. Vera, be reasonable. I am being reasonable, I said. I am letting you speak without interruption. My sister snapped her gum and tried to recover her tone. The offer expires tonight. Pack your keepsakes and thank us later. I rose and slipped the phone into my pocket. Thank you, I said. You have given me exactly what I needed this morning. I lifted the notepad and took a photo of the numbers. Breakfast will be in the kitchen if you are hungry. I have calls to make. I walked down the hall, not fast and not slow. Lillian opened her door a few inches. I nodded. She nodded back. The day had chosen its direction. The first step belonged to me. Today. The red dot glowed in my pocket as I walked back to the table. I set my phone down so they could see that it was still recording. My father crossed his arms and tried on a calm face that did not fit. My mother tapped the brochure with a nail the color of dried cherries. My sister bounced her heel like a metronome rushing the song. Agent will come at 4, my sister said. We can stage a walkthrough and lock in the price. You will not stage my life, I said. You have already said enough for one morning. My mother leaned forward. Stop playing the victim. We are doing what should have been done years ago. You never understood gratitude. I understood invoices, I said. I understood that my name meant money. Something in her face broke like a thin plate. She looked past me, angry at the ceiling. Then her voice rose, sharp and wild, and she said the sentence that split the room. You should never have been born. We raised you so you could raise your sister. The words struck like cold metal. My father winced, and then nodded as if the line had always lived in him. My sister stared at the floor and smiled, without teeth. The kitchen clock ticked. I felt the chair under me and chose not to flinch. Say it again, I said. Please. I want the recording to be clear. My mother laughed. You heard me. You owe us because you exist. You were the practice child, the useful one. We made you sturdy so the real daughter could shine. Real daughter. The phrase hovered over the table like steam from a spoiled stew. I thought of every transfer I had made, every emergency with my name on the receipt, every birthday card with no signature. The math added to the same sum. I had been a wallet with a pulse. My father jabbed a thumb at the hall. Pack your things. We will have the locks changed by nightfall. Your aunt will go where people are paid to deal with chairs. This is a family home. We are taking it back. I picked up my phone and watched the line crawl across the screen. I appreciate your honesty, I said. People hide the reason they do harm. You gift wrap yours. My sister rolled her eyes. Do not get dramatic. This is business. Business has ledgers, I said. Business has proof. Business has terms both sides agree to. What you are doing is not business. It is hunger in a suit. For a second, my mother looked tired, not repentant, just worn thin. Then she squared her shoulders and put her mask back on. The past is past. We need the house. You will comply. No, I said. I will remember. I stood. The room tilted, then steadied. I could feel Daniel in the steady part. I tucked the phone into my pocket and touched the back of the chair to keep my hands. I walked to the window. The ramp caught the sun and threw a ribbon of light across the entry tile. Aunt Lillian's door stayed closed, but I imagined her counting breaths to keep even. Behind me, my father said my name like a command. I let it pass. I pressed save and let the silence answer for me. For a while, my mother muttered about paperwork and how a signature is a small price. My sister whispered a number like a dare. I turned and looked at each of them in turn. You have given me everything I need, I said. You gave me your plan. You gave me motive. You gave me a recording that shows what this has always been. And what is that? My father asked. I met his eyes. Exploitation, I said, and the end of it begins today. I shut my bedroom door and set the envelopes on the desk. I photographed every page with steady hands and uploaded them through Mark Rivera's secure portal. Deed to trust, recorded memorandum, trustee designation with my name alone. The insurance policy with the rider Daniel insisted on. The beneficiary sheet that protected Aunt Lillian's right to live here. I added the audio file from breakfast and a photo of my sister's notepad. I wrote a short summary and hit send. My phone buzzed almost at once. Mark answered on the first ring. His voice was calm in a way that slows the room. I have your files. Take a breath. Tell me what happened. I described the suitcases, the empty spaces, the threats, and the plan to list the house. I kept it clean. He asked 2 clarifying questions. Then he said the only sentence I needed. Vera, they have no path. The home is debt-free and it sits inside your trust. I closed my eyes. So they cannot sell it. They cannot move Aunt Lillian. They cannot force me out. That is correct. The insurer confirmed the rider. The lender posted payoff and released its claim. Your trust controls the property. You control the trust. He paused. We will move in steps. Tell me the steps, I said. I will draft a notice to post on the door that states the trustee's authority and warns against trespass. I will send a cease and desist to the agent your sister named. I will notify the resale company that any transfer of your property is disputed and must freeze. If they resist, we escalate. If your family refuses to leave, call for a civil standby. You will not argue. You will cite the notice and let the officers watch them walk out. I felt my shoulders drop, like a load had been put down where it belonged. Good, today is the right day. Email me the funeral program for the record, he added. It shows timing. Also, keep your phone on. I will text the draft within the hour. Thank you, Mark. You did the hard work 2 years ago, he said. Now it pays you back. I ended the call and touched the envelopes. Aunt Lillian waited in the doorway, eyes bright. Well, she whispered. It is time they harvest what they planted, I said, and I smiled without heat. I saved Mark's number to favorites, slipped the phone into my pocket, and walked toward the living room with the steadiness Daniel left me to carry. I was up before the sun. Mark sent the final notice at dawn, and I printed it on bright paper and slid it into a clear sleeve so rain would not smudge the ink. Aunt Lillian watched me from the hallway with her robe tied tight. I told her I would be right back. The porch smelled like cold wood. I taped the notice at eye level and pressed each corner until the tape held like a promise. I made coffee and waited. The house felt steady. At 7, the hallway stirred. My parents and my sister moved toward the door. My father reached for the knob and blinked at the color. My mother leaned in. My sister read the first line out loud, then her voice caught. Property belongs to Trustee Vera. Any unauthorized occupancy is trespassing. The words hung in the entry. My father jerked the paper, saw the letterhead, and flushed. You dared to go around your parents, he said. You tried to trap us with a trick. There is no trick, I said. Only the truth in writing. My sister jabbed a finger at my chest. You owe this family the house. We invested years in you. Pay your debt. Debt would require an agreement, I said. The papers say something else. My mother raised her phone. I am calling the agent. We will handle this. We have rights. You have choices, I said. The notice explains what follows if you choose badly. My father crumpled the edge and tried to peel the tape. He stopped when I held up my phone. The recording icon glowed. Every word matters, I told him. The trust holds title. The mortgage is paid. The property is protected. For a moment, no one spoke. The maple rustled. Lillian rolled to the threshold and placed her hand on the rail. Her face was calm. My sister took a breath that sounded like a dare. You cannot put us out. People will talk. Imagine how you will look when they hear you banished your own family. Let them talk, I said. Let them hear the recording. They can decide what kind of family turns a funeral into a shopping trip. My mother's mouth tightened. You are cruel. No, I said. I am clear. My father pointed at the notice. It is just paper. We can fight paper. You cannot fight blood. You do not get to weaponize blood, I said. My husband is gone. My grief is not your ladder. Step down. He closed his mouth. The notice stared back without blinking. Mark had written it in simple language with statutes below. It did not raise its voice. My sister tried a softer tone. What about Aunt Lillian? She can come with us. We found a place with activities. Lillian lifted her chin. My friends are here, she said. My independence is here. She is a beneficiary, I added. Her right to remain is documented. The hallway smelled like coffee and cold air. I set 3 mugs on the console and poured. Sit and read this with me, I said. It says exactly what I told you. I will not argue. I will follow process. My mother slapped the wall. Process is for cowards. Process is for adults, I said. She turned toward the kitchen. We will not leave, she said. You will, I answered, keeping my voice kind. You will leave because the choices are simple. Walk out or be escorted. That is not a threat. It is a schedule. My father looked at the porch and then at his suitcase. He picked up the handle and set it down. The handle clicked. My sister stared at the letters on the door as if staring could change words. I opened the door and let the light spill in. The notice fluttered once and went still. Breakfast is on the stove, I said. I have calls to return. Officers prefer mornings for civil standbys. It keeps tempers cooler. My mother scoffed. My father rubbed his temple. My sister hugged herself and tried to smile. The silence felt like the moment before a summer storm when even the birds wait. I turned to Lillian. Would you like the porch? I asked. She nodded. I rolled her forward and parked her, chair where the sun could find her knees. She lifted her face to the light. Behind us, my parents whispered. The words had lost their teeth. The notice had given the house a voice. I stood beside Lillian and let the breeze carry the coffee smell through the screen. My smile was small and real. The morning had chosen. We would follow it where the truth led. I poured another cup and waited for footsteps to accept the only honest ending to arrive. The patrol car rolled up just after 9. Blue lights washed the porch rail. 2 officers stepped out and greeted me. I had called dispatch at sunrise for a civil standby. I handed them Mark's notice and my identification. They read both and nodded. One asked me to confirm the date of posting and the color of the notice. I pointed to tape. Ma'am, we will keep the peace while you instruct your guests to leave, the older officer said. His calm settled the hallway. Aunt Lillian watched from the porch. The younger officer asked if anyone inside had medical needs. I said no. My parents stood by their luggage. My sister hovered near the kitchen with her phone. The older officer addressed my father. Sir, the trustee has posted notice. Any continued occupancy without permission is trespass. You need to gather your belongings and exit. My father tried to argue from blood and history. The officer kept his tone even. This is not a courtroom. This is a doorway. You need to comply. My mother complained about respect. The younger officer offered a choice. Walk out today or we start paperwork that ends the same way. The room deflated. My father zipped his suitcase in short jerks. My sister filmed, saying the internet would judge me. The older officer told her to stop recording people without consent. She lowered the phone. They moved slowly at first. My mother tried to slip 2 dish towels into her bag until the younger officer reminded her to leave household items. She put them back. My father carried the last box to the porch and paused under the notice, reading the first line again as if the words might soften. "Keys," I said. I held out a small bowl. He placed 1 copy in it and kept his eyes on the maple. The younger officer checked the locks and wrote a short entry on his clipboard. "Property is secure," he said. Before they reached the end of the walk, my phone rang. The caller ID showed the resale company. I put it on speaker so the officers could witness the exchange. A manager apologized and said sales had been frozen. He said items matching my photographs were set aside. He asked when I would like to schedule pickup. I thanked him and named an afternoon. He promised receipts and a chain of custody form. My sister spun around. "You cannot reverse it. I already made deals." "The store can reverse a sale when goods were misrepresented," the manager said. "We have your messages and will cooperate with any inquiry." He ended the call. The younger officer lifted his eyebrows at the word inquiry, then kept his face neutral. My family stood on the sidewalk with their bags, while the house exhaled. The officers waited until a car arrived. The older one reminded them that returning without permission would generate a report. My mother asked where they were supposed to go. He said the city had resources and handed her a card. My father refused the card and stared at me as if staring could change the paper on my door. I wished them safety and meant it. They looked surprised. I did not celebrate. I signed the officer's log and thanked them for keeping order. I brought the bowl of keys inside. Lillian touched my sleeve and said, "You did not raise your voice?" I answered that the notice spoke better than I ever could. Then my phone chimed again. Mark texted that the agent had received the cease and desist and would not schedule showings. He attached proof. I forwarded it to my email and saved it beside the trust and the rider. The house felt like it had put its shoulders back. I closed the door, turned the deadbolt, and stood in the quiet after a room remembers its true owner. I closed the door after the officers left, and the house took a long breath. The notice on the glass was still. The air felt newly washed, like rain that finished its argument with the earth. I set the bowl of keys on the console and walked to the living room where a pale square of dust marked what had been taken. In the corner, Daniel's chair waited. It had been shoved sideways during the chaos. I found a cloth and began to clean. Each stroke brought back the grain of the wood and the life of the room. I pulled the chair into the light and wiped the arms until they felt like river stones. A faint ring stained the floor where his mug used to sit. I knelt and rubbed until the circle faded. My hands remembered the rhythm before my mind caught up. In silence, I set the chair facing the window the way he liked it, just off center so he could watch the street and the maple at the same time. The ramp shone like a quiet answer. The air carried coffee and pine, the fragrance of mornings that kept us steady. On the porch, I found the throw blanket he used on cool evenings. Dust clung to the edges. I shook it out and folded it twice, then once more, the way he taught me so it became a neat small square. I placed it on the back of the chair and pressed my palm there. Heat rose through my skin. For a moment, the house felt like a chest that had found its heartbeat again. A memory opened the door without knocking. Daniel sat on the step tying his shoelaces. The laces had gone soft from use, and he pinched them between his fingers with care. He looked up at me with that gentle grin that always found my center. He said we would take the long block so Aunt Lillian could catch early light on the library bricks. He told me to bring the coupon for the bakery because a day with fresh bread is already a holiday. I remember the tilt of his head, when he laughed and how the sound made rooms kinder. I moved the chair a few inches to catch a warmer angle. Aunt Lillian rolled in and set her hand on my shoulder. The weight was light and steady. Her voice was soft and sure. Daniel prepared everything because he knew you were worthy. The sentence touched a place in me that had been kept behind glass. It cracked and let the air in. My eyes filled, and this time the tears did not burn. They cooled what grief had scalded. I sat in his chair and held the blanket to my chin. From here, I saw the small flaws he never fixed because he said Holmes should tell the truth. A paint line that wavered behind the bookcase. A chip in the baseboard near the ramp. None of it asked to be hidden. It asked to be seen and loved anyway. I thought about the years I tried to earn a tenderness that was never for sale. I thought about the way he paid in presents instead of promises. The phone on the table lit with messages. I turned it face down. The house did not need other voices. I breathed and let the quiet do what it does best. I walked to the kitchen and set one mug on the counter. I did not pour coffee. I only placed the cup where his hand always reached. Then I returned to the chair and watched light slide across the floor. Aunt Lillian squeezed my shoulder again. "You stood up without shouting," she said. "You honored him. You honored yourself." I nodded and felt the truth click into place. I was crying, but the tears felt like spring water. They left me clearer. They left me standing. Outside, the maple dropped a single seed that spun and landed on the step like a tiny compass pointing home. I picked it up and set it on the windowsill, a small green witness to a promise kept. News drifted back in pieces, the way leaves blow across a sidewalk after a storm. A neighbor from my parents' complex called Aunt Lillian to ask if everything was all right, because voices had kept the courtyard awake. Someone had heard my father accuse my mother of ruining his standing with her demands. Someone else heard my sister yell that she had been promised a fresh start and that I had stolen it. I did not correct anyone. I let the stories travel on their own feet. Within a week, collection notices found them. A credit card froze. A payday lender called during dinner and did not care who answered. The agent my sister had courted would not return her messages after Mark's letter reached the agency inbox. She told friends the market had turned against her. They stopped liking her posts. The applause died the way applause always dies when the curtain drops and the bill is due. I learned that my parents sold a few pieces they still had, then argued about the money in the parking lot. A woman from the third floor told me she had seen my father sleeping in the back seat with his coat over his chest, while my mother sat on the curb smoking a cigarette she had sworn she quit. The next day, a tow notice went up on their windshield. My sister's boyfriend left a single trash bag by the stairs and moved in with a coworker. The neighbors began closing their blinds when the shouting started, and opened them when the silence returned, the truest weather report on the block. I did not call. I did not post. I kept a folder with screenshots and receipts, because order is how I breathe, but I did not feed the fire. When a stranger messaged me a video of my parents arguing by the mailbox, I declined to share. I made tea, carried a cup to Lillian, and reminded myself that pain likes company and I would not be its host. More notices arrived for them. A utility shutoff. A late fee that stacked on another late fee like a careless tower. My mother tried to sell the story that I had betrayed blood. People listened for a minute and then remembered their own bills. Pity is loud at first, and then it goes quiet. Consequences do not need an audience. One afternoon, I drove past their complex on my way to the library. I did not slow down. I saw a garden bed filled with weeds that had once been petunias. I thought about hands that plant and hands that grasp. Planting takes patience. Grasping takes the soil with the root and leaves nothing for tomorrow. At home, I put Daniel's blanket over the back of his chair and checked the lock on the front door. The house felt light in a way that did not insult grief. Lillian rolled to the window and said the sky looked almost new. I stood beside her and watched a sidewalk that finally belonged to our quiet. I let out a breath I had been storing since the day the ramp first dried in the sun. "Justice comes in silence," I said, and the room agreed. We made dinner, ate slowly, and let the evening hold us. We spent the next Saturday moving the house back into its own shape. I swept the pale rectangles where furniture had been stolen and marked new positions with blue painter's tape. Aunt Lillian directed the angles like a conductor, her hands describing gentle arcs. We slid Daniel's chair to the window, set the table under the softer light, and left a clear path from the ramp to the kitchen so wheels would never hesitate. With every measured inch, the rooms stopped bracing for impact and began to breathe again. We planted color in the soil by the porch. I loosened dirt that had hardened during months of worry, while Lillian tucked seedlings into pockets she made with her knuckles. We chose marigolds for courage, basil for steadiness, and lavender for sleep. I pressed the roots and whispered the names out loud so the house could learn them. A robin watched from the rail and tilted its head as if taking attendance. Inside, I mended a nick in the baseboard and rubbed oil into the handrails until the wood turned warm. Lillian arranged books on the lowest shelf and kept only the ones we loved enough to read twice. We hung a small bell by the back door that chimed when the breeze arrived like a visitor who knew to knock. I kept Daniel's blanket on his chair and smoothed it flat with the care you give to something that listens. Mornings settled into a new, kinder order. I still woke to the grinder, only now it was my hand on the switch. I warmed 2 mugs and filled one with tea for Lillian. I poured my coffee and stood in the square of light that traveled across the tile like a faithful friend. Each day the house announced itself with modest pride. Floorboards answered with soft clicks. The ramp carried sunlight like a ribbon laid across the threshold. The maple tossed shadows that looked like handwriting. Every morning, when the sun came through the door, I knew Daniel was still here. He was present in the reach of the cupboard handle. He lowered, so I would not stretch too high. He was present in the faucet that never stuck because he had fixed it between a joke and a song. He was present in the pause I learned to take before speaking, the pause that made truth easier to hear. I told him good morning and meant it. The house had been a battlefield, and now it was a clinic for the heart. We did not erase the dents, we understood them. We set the table anyway and invited quiet to sit. Friends stopped by with casseroles and news. They left their shoes by the mat without being told. Lillian read on the porch while bees practiced around the basil. I watered the marigolds and watched their small faces turn toward the heat. Home turned back into a verb. It taught us how to return. We stayed and healed here. I stand in the doorway of the spare room and let the quiet answer back. The walls are bare. Only Daniel's old chair remains. I dust the arms with my sleeve and turn it toward the window where the maple writes its moving script. Light slips across the floor like a calm tide. I keep it there, as a reminder that grief did not take my balance. I keep it there, as a reminder. I stood steady, and I will keep walking. Aunt Lillian calls from the hall and asks if I am ready for tea. I tell her I will be there in a minute. I sit in the chair and listen to the house breathe. Somewhere the bell by the back door taps once. The room smells like wood oil and fresh soil from the flower bed we planted. The future feels small and honest. It arrives on quiet feet. It waits until it is invited. I think about next season. Lillian wants to join the library workshop again. I want to take a night class in carpentry so I can keep these rails smooth with my own hands. Neighbors have asked about starting a porch book club. The marigolds will grow taller, the basil will sweeten, the ramp will carry more sunlight. None of it is grand. All of it is enough. I tell Daniel what I plan while I sit here. I thank him for the file folders and the patient foresight. I tell him the house has learned to speak in a gentle voice, and that I finally learned to listen. I tell him the door is locked and love is not. I tell him we will be all right. Before we say goodbye, I would love to know where you are, watching from. Is it a quiet morning with a warm cup of coffee? Or a late night when stories like this keep you company? Tell me in the comments and know that we read every note with gratitude. If this story touched your heart, please consider subscribing to the channel. Not only to hear more stories like this, but to join a community that believes in kindness, healing, and second chances. Thank you for spending your time with us today. Wherever you are, I hope you carry this story with you. Remember, sometimes the miracle does not knock on your door. It waits quietly until you are ready to open your heart. Take care, and I will see you in the next story.